Today on the Dolby Creator Talks podcast, we welcome cinematographer Robbie Ryan here to discuss his Academy Award nominated work on Poor Things, the latest and the wildest film from director Yorgos Lanthimos. This is all part of our continuing coverage of the 2024 Academy Awards. We are once again interviewing the nominees in the sound and cinematography and original score categories. So please be sure you're subscribed to us. Poor Things won the prestigious Golden Lion when it premiered at the Venice Film Festival back in September. And now it is nominated for 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. For Robbie, this is his second collaboration with filmmaker Yorgos Lanthimos after they worked together on The Favorite, for which Robbie got his other Best Cinematography nomination. But since this is our very first time having Robbie on the podcast to talk about his work, I started the conversation by asking how his filmmaking career began.
Me and my friends and my cousins, we used to make little Super 8 films when we were 13, 14. So I was kind of that generation where video cameras hadn't come in yet. Certainly not any kind of like online mobile camera stuff. So we were just really keen sort of enthusiasts. And my dad had a Super 8 camera when I was growing up. So I was like, ooh, can we have a go at that? And my brother would write some stories and we went out filming all these little short films and we got the bug pretty instantly. So I was about 13, 14 when I was doing that. So I haven't stopped since. And to be honest with you, it's exactly the same feeling as it was back then. So I'm blessed with that, for sure.
Just the scale has gotten a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I'd probably be a little bit more tuned into what is needed. But, you know, the enthusiasm hasn't, which is really important.
Robbie, on this podcast, we talk a lot with filmmakers about the first 10 minutes of the movie and the importance of, you know, getting the audience into this world. And I can't think of a movie where the world building is more important than Poor Things. You know, that first 10 minutes, you're not only establishing the characters and the situation, but the mood and the tone. But importantly, you're also really letting them know what's the cinematic language that you're going to be using to tell this story. And what you're doing in Poor Things is so stylized and dramatic. I'd love to just talk about how you and Yorgos Lanthimos talked about that first chunk of the film and what you needed the audience to kind of take away from that, and then how that affected the visual style.
Well, with Yorgos, he wouldn't necessarily talk to that level about it. He would talk about the whole film and its sort of like approach aesthetically as a whole. You know, it's not kind of something where we go, okay, we're going to talk about the first chunk. But what he did change up a lot at the beginning of the film was that he hadn't chosen to do it in black and white until quite late in the process. And I remember like 2 or 3 weeks before we started filming, he goes, I think we might try and extend make a black and white beginning to the film. And, you know, from my perspective, I was like, yeah, all right, that's great. But then from the production designer's perspective, it was a little bit more, oh, okay, that wasn't part of what they thought about. So, you know, he's quite intuitive, and he likes to kind of feel how it's all working out. So it's a really nice environment to be in, because it's not like, you know, this is the way it has to be, this is what we're doing. With Yorgos, it's a bit more like, let's get some ingredients, let's get tools, and let's, you know, pare them down to what we think is going to be the right, you know, choices, and then we'll move on from there. And that is very much the approach the whole film took. Then we did a lot of testing at the beginning, because we had a long process of preparation for the film. I was in Hungary for like 12 weeks, which is for me quite a, you know, long process. So I was able to use that time to do a lot of camera lens testing with Yorgos, and that was great fun. We kind of got it down to, you know, a finite amount of lenses for the film, because he didn't want to have too many lenses. He's really good at, like, you know, paring it down. But as a visual aesthetic from the beginning, you know, the world building in Poor Things is sort of, it's all in the script in a way, you know, so it sets off on a path. Like the thing he said he was going to do, because of obviously being black and white in the whole entire beginning of the film, meant that he scared the producers a little bit, or the financiers a tiny bit. So I remember him coming back from a phone call with Searchlight, saying, "Oh, it went well." He just all you have to do is have a little bit of color at the very beginning, which is the shot you see at the very beginning of the film. Actually, there's some titles as well which are in color, but the very beginning of the film is Bella or it's actually Victoria spoiler alert, on the
Good point.
on a
Yes.
bridge, and she sort of falls off the bridge. And that was like, if we have a bit of color there to start, that means we're okay, because when the rest of the next half an hour is in black and white, people will remember there was a bit of color to start. So that was, there are things that we were consciously doing, and from there on in, like we were prepared. We worked, tested, and then we kind of got shooting, and that was the language, and that's the way we went forward.
But that must have been quite a curveball to switch to black and white so shortly before you started photography, because you were also you were capturing on 35 neg, right? So did that mean, you captured on black and white stock?
Yeah, everything. Yorgos is he hasn't shot on digital since The Lobster. He kind of went way off film digital shooting on The Lobster, and he's a huge advocate of shooting on celluloid, as I am myself, and that's, I think, why we connect, because we both love filming on film. And I think we shot on black and white negative, and we shot on color negative, and we shot on Ektachrome reversal stock. So the black and white thing was always in the mix, because there's the chapter headings are in the film where they were always going to be in black and white. And then he sort of went, I really want to try more of this, because he loves shooting black and white stills as well. So I think he just wanted an approach with this one to, obviously he intuitively thought this would be a good way to begin the film, because obviously her world goes into this crazy new place, and it's a good transition, and it rubber stamps it. What I love about this is that usually in a film it's color and the flashbacks are in black and white, but in this the film is in black and white and the flashbacks are in color, and then it goes into another journey and another special explosion of color when she goes to Lisbon. So the thing was, we shot the flashbacks, which is the reanimation scene, on Ektachrome VistaVision. So that was very exciting.
I want to get into that and dive a little bit more into that. But before we do, I think for our audience who might not necessarily know what that means, what's the difference between color negative and then Ektachrome?
Well, Ektachrome is the easiest way to explain it. Is it's like, you remember you used to get slide film and watch it at home. Well, if you're a certain generation, you'd get like a little kind of the carousel slide film. So that's a positive bit of film. So when you took that picture, or whoever took that picture, they got it back in the slide, meant that the film in the camera was not a negative, it was a positive. So that is what we were filming. That is what Ektachrome is. You're filming. If you looked at your strip of like film, it's all positive images instead of negative images, and inherently it's more contrasty, it's more colorful, and it's exactly what Yorgos likes in his cinematography, really, because it's something he leans toward a lot in grading, is to go a bit more contrasty. So I think that was something he was really keen to test out, and he'd been in tune with Marcel Rev, who was shooting Euphoria, a TV show, and he'd got Kodak to cut 35 mil positive of what Kodak originally reissued with this stock, because it was a reissued stock which was on 16 mil and only on 16 mil. But then Marcel got them to cut it to 35. We got some of that, and we were able to get more of it off Kodak as 35 mil. But the thing with Marcel's stuff is that he only processed it as cross-process, because in the genius of Kodak, they've reissued this stock that can't actually be processed. It can only be processed in maybe 2 labs in the whole world. So luckily, there was a lab in Berlin which processed for us, and they were great people called Andek, and there's a guy called Ludwig in there who was very, very good with us, and he was able to do really nice E6 processing, because that's the different process you do, and it looked great. We loved it. So it was a really fortuitous place to be filming.
You said the reanimation sequence, which immediately stood out to me in terms of its contrast, just the inkiness of the blacks and the vibrancy of the colors. Were there other key sequences that you shot in Ektachrome?
We were kind of saying that we'd shoot all the exteriors on Ektachrome. So all the Lisbon exteriors are Ektachrome, the ship exteriors are on Ektachrome, Paris exteriors are Ektachrome. Anywhere where we could kind of, because it's a very slow film stock, so anywhere that we had a bit of exposure that we could, get it achieved would be sort of what we thought of. But we shot the reanimation scene on it, and that was where the story with it goes, if it's dark, it might not be retrievable. So that was an extra bit of pressure on me. I was like, oh, and the lenses sometimes we were shooting were a little bit slower. So the reanimation scene needed a lot of light, but I remember that coming back a bit dark, and I was like really nervous about it. And Yorgos was like, yeah, it's a bit dark, but we'll be okay. And it was okay. So I learned a lot about using it, and the results really were they zinged. They came back really different and exciting, and I think it informed the grade of the rest of the color footage. Because you have this as a kind of a placeholder as such, and it's like, okay, that's the way we like to look at it. Let's swing everything a bit that way.
Yeah.
And we have a great grader called Greg Fisher in Company 3 who did all the work, and he did a magical job on that.
You said that you shot the exteriors on Ektachrome, but all your exteriors were actually on soundstage, right? So you're still having to pump a lot of light through there.
Yeah, well, but with the approach we made with the film was that the approach Yorgos, from what I learned doing The Favourite with him, is that he uses obviously quite wide lenses on his films, so he doesn't really like film lights on set. So we always approach, well, since that Favourite onto Poor Things, the approach was, let's have a source of light from outside the building that lights through these windows, and that will give us enough ambience inside, with including practical lights inside that we can kind of use without having to have any other film lights anywhere. So that sort of like made it simpler for me in the studio aesthetic, because I just built big skies, and we got a lot of lights, and they created the ambience that was what was needed. But it was a simple approach. Instead of being very complex, it was quite simple. From an ideas point of view, the logistics of it, that took a little bit more, like a lot of rigging, and the gaffers and the rigging gaffers did an amazing job at always being one step ahead, because we had 6 sound stages going one after the other, which was totally different to what I've ever done. Like I'm so used to going into a location and having a couple of redheads. So, both all of us on the crew were quite new to the scale of this. So it was I always felt it was a bit like a campus where we were all like, how's your day going? And, I think it worked out great.
It's the second film that you've made with Yorgos, and obviously the first time you guys worked together on The Favourite, it's the visual style is completely different. So I'm kind of curious, how did you meet up with Yorgos? How did he find his way to you to start this collaboration?
Firstly, I think this visual style is exactly the same personally, but because we only did zooms was the only difference, but everything in that is exactly what we did in The Favourite. It's just a different kind of world, I guess. But Yorgos was we went for a coffee a good while ago. I think it was after he'd done The Lobster, actually, because he sent me off to watch The Lobster in a cinema because I hadn't seen it, and he was just sort of looking for a new DP, and he'd maybe seen stuff I'd done, I don't know, that he liked. But we had a good time. We got on pretty good, and when we had our coffee, and he was just sort of checking out whether I was able to sort of be kind of able to be competent, I guess. I don't know. I still pinch myself thinking that he saw something in me that was half decent. And I've really enjoyed the process since then. It's a very unique sort of relationship.
You had a good first date, and look what happened. It's all good.
Sort of, I guess. Yeah, that's maybe it. Yeah, who knows?
But Yorgos he's a very accomplished photographer in his own right. And I'm curious, for you as a cinematographer, what's it like to work with a director who has such a keen understanding of your art form?
Oh, he's way more masterful at cinematography than I am. Like, he knows everything. And on this film, in Poor Things, let me go back. On The Favourite, he had a digital camera that he was taking stills with, and he kind of was losing sort of patience with that. So between The Favourite and Poor Things, he'd gotten really into film stills on 35mm, and then he got up to a large format, and he was shooting on this camera called a Chamonix large format camera. So in between every take, Yorgos would go, okay, it's portrait time, and he'd go in, take a portrait of one of the actors, and then he, it was on a, like, one of those put the hood over, pull it in, take it out. And like, this is in between figuring out takes and drama and all that. So he'd do that, all on his own, put it in his little kind of in a safe box, and then he'd bring it home. And actually, him and Emma would go like do processing at nighttime, and sort of like develop these pictures, scan them, and bring them in the next day, and go, oh yeah, well, this is a nice shot. And I'm like, where are you finding the time and the energy to do this? It was impressive. So he and his photographs that you see from a publicity point of view for this film are beautiful. So I'm in awe of his sort of cinematic eye and his knowledge. He's way more copped on than I am. I'm a good operator. I think that's all that Yorgos sees in me. And even then, when I'm on the wheels, he says, you're not doing them anymore, because I tried that in the Favourite and it was a disaster on, like when you're trying to do the wheels and remote heads. So he's like, on Poor Things, he made me sit on, most people these days would do a crane shot and they'd have it on a techno crane and there'd be the wheels and there'd be loads of that. And he was going, no, we'll get a sit on crane and you can sit on that. So I had a sit on crane, which I enjoyed. I liked being on that because, it's nice and there's a nice bit of air up there.
That's amazing.
So yeah, he's super tuned in. Like it's impressive on all levels. He's a really phenomenal director on every level because he knows everything about everybody's department. But what he does really well is that he doesn't make it overbearing. He's kind of like, he lets you take it and go your journey, and then he'll kind of like go, okay, that's going good. I didn't think you'd do that, or yeah, that's what I was hoping you'd do. So he's not pushy, he's not like, he's just more like disappointed if you're not doing it right, which is crushing.
Which is even worse. It's even worse, right?
No, it's good. It's good. It makes you actually really work to your best. It's not making you feel like you're being pushed.
So, Robbie, I've heard you talk about this kind of crazy concept, which was that you shot the movie using 5 lenses, and you almost had a rule, like every scene you had to use all 5 lenses. So can you tell us a little bit, like, what were the 5 lenses and where did that approach come from?
We did a lot of testing, and he kind of had it in his head that he wanted to have 5, something where he could do whatever he like. With this film, he wanted to obviously still have the wide angle sort of aesthetic. And we went further with the wide angle aesthetic because he wanted to have a kind of a porthole sort of vignetted wide angle, which was a new one. And I was like, oh, okay, how are we going to do that? And, I kind of done a bit of digital photography or like video, large format cinematography lately, where there's a lot of lenses don't fit on the large format sensor. So you get this vignette and you're like, oh, Jesus, that doesn't fit the lens or the sensor. So I knew it from that. I said, well, hang on, if we use a 16mm lens on a 35mm negative, that might happen. And it worked out really perfect. We had this like 4mm Optex lens for 16mm that when you put it on 35mm, just had that perfect circle. So that was a lucky break. And I always like to think I thought that one up. Yay!
That vignetting was not a post-production effect. That happened in
No, that's the full aspect of the lens. Yeah, and like what's really nice about that, you get these aberrations around the very edges of it, and it has its little like organic quality to it, which was very sweet. And none of that was posted. That was all real. And like the 4mm lens is great because it's like it's got a focus of 2 feet to infinity, so everything's in focus. But we still found a way of getting one shot out of focus because we were too close to Rami Youssef in one shot, and it's like, but it's in the movie, and that's what I like about Yorgos as well. He'll go with it, and if there's an error or what would be called technically not right, he kind of, that's okay, and he'll move on with it, which I think is really a good trait. But so we had that, and then he was also wanted to do, that was the wide angles, and he also wanted to develop a kind of a zoom language with this one. So we kind of he showed me a lot of Fassbinder films. He was like, this is great. I love the way the sort of lens develops the scene and it stays with the scene, and we could maybe shoot scenes in its entirety on a zoom, which I thought great. And it was a really lovely way of working every scene where you kind of we dollied and tracked and zoomed, and I got used to doing that. And that was actually, from my perspective, the most challenging piece of the filmmaking, because the timings had to be right. And sometimes the timings weren't right, but I got, I was aware that was like, had to be more, you had to get that on the ball a bit better than just being on a wide lens. A wide lens is the easiest way for me to film something, because you go, hey, it looks great. And you step back, everybody else has a tough time, but the cinematographer pretty much has an easy time. Then there was, he also wanted to learn, he liked the, very shallow focus, early sort of photography, of like the, third of the 19th century, no, third of the 20th century, sorry, where was it 2018, whatever. It was early photography, and he wanted to try it out. There's these lenses called Petzval lenses, which were made by I think he was Hungarian actually, Petzval, and he created these lenses like 100 years ago. And Yorgos had sort of through again, like digital photography had embraced the lomography, basically it embraced the Petzvals, and they were very kind of like rudimentary design, but then they've been rehoused, so we were able to kind of land on these, and he was keen to try those out. And they are the ones that have that really swirly bokeh behind them. Anytime you're in nature or in like an outdoor space, it seems to grab the background and swirl it around. So it was really good for her kind of world, the way Bella's like, a little bit a different approach.
Yeah, I want to stop you right there, because those scenes just jumped out at me, and I thought, what the hell am I looking at? That's just something. It's just something in the nature of the glass
doing that
effect.
The glass, yeah. It's a very simple glass. I think it's like, I was talking to guys from Petzval last weekend, and they're saying it's just the way that the two elements of glass are put together, that the distance and the tuning of it creates this bokeh, and it's obviously it's a faster lens. I think it's kind of like no, it's actually not. It's a 2.8, if I remember, 2.2 and 2.8. So it's just the nature of the lens, the glass, the way that Petzval kind of manufactured it, and it's become very popular in digital sort of photography, because everybody wants to bend the sensor as much as they can. But I hadn't done it before on film, so it was great. It was exactly what he wanted, and that was that portrait type lens, and then we had the zooms and we had the wide lenses, and yeah, that was about the lot of them really. The fact that we had maybe 2 zooms, 2 portrait lenses, and 2 wide angles, so it was 5 or 6 lenses. And his theory was, let's use them in every scene to it would be weird if you didn't use it in the scene. So we kind of like we used them, and the fact that they were always there meant that they were always like a finite amount of lenses to choose from.
Now, do you guys, how do you prepare? Is this all storyboarded? Do you know going in, what lenses you're going to use on what setup, or you just kind of wing it on the day?
He's very instinctful. Yeah, we did do storyboards very briefly for the reanimation scene and the scenes which involved miniature work, because we needed to talk to other departments, but it still didn't work out that great with the storyboard system. I think that's why Yorgos likes getting a team of people around him who are, open to being, not too set in stone what we're doing. And I'm very like that. I like to be, what you want, okay, we'll do that, and work around the spontaneity of that idea. And he's, you get into the rhythm of what way we're sort of working, and if everybody is up to speed and able to change it at a moment's notice, then I think he likes that. And I like that way of working myself. I find storyboards kind of sometimes, are good. It depends on the type of film, really. And this film didn't really need it so much. And he doesn't work that way.
But I'm kind of curious for you, kind of how that complicates the day for you, because like if you're mixing and matching sort of the wide angle primes with a zoom, zoom lenses are a lot slower because they've got so many more elements in them, right? So how do you you have to kind of adjust your lighting as you go through the day?
No, not really. The zooms we got were like pretty sort of the same, actually. They were 2.2 to 2.8. So generally everything was kind of the same. We were always able to work within the light exposure, I think. And I didn't have a problem with that. Like the zoom thing with him, he wanted to get an optically impossible zoom. He wanted something that was like a 10 mil zoom to a 200 mil zoom. And on film, you just can't get that. So we ended up with a 16.5 millimeter to 110 millimeter, which was a big master zoom by Ari. And it's great. It was, and I always thought he's going to hate this one, but it was actually because it's very sharp and it's very like, and it felt like it wouldn't have a quality that might be what we were looking for. But he actually went, that's great. That looks good because with that film can take sharp lenses better than digital can, So in a way, we're always leaning toward more sharp lenses now on film than the softer ones, because some of the older lenses have a bit of a dodgy resolve when they're on the wide end. Wide lenses tend to be a bit soft. So I think Yorgos really likes sharpness on film to a point. So the zoom we ended up with was great. And yeah, no, I wouldn't have had a problem. It didn't affect my day at all. I was like, okay, we'll do that. Bop, 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 bop. It was always in and around the right world of exposure.
Yeah.
It was more softness is the problem. But we had a great focus puller as well, Olga Abrahamson, who was amazing. She did the wonderful zoom. Like you're starting on somebody's eye. Like Emma's eye is usually there, super close up, and on a track you're pulling out to the wide end, and like never did it go out of focus. Olga was, she came out of the heavens, and she was amazing. I can't thank her enough. Thank you, Olga.
I loved the look of the zooms. I love that effect. I hope you guys are single-handedly bring the zoom back. It's almost like it almost feels like voyeuristic in a way.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I think they always had a bit of a bad rep, zooms, but they're absolutely beautiful, and they're they create a whole tension and emotion. They've got a lot of things going for them as far as if they're used properly, or not properly, but used in the right way for the story that you're trying to tell. And with Poor Things, you're in her head a lot, so you're kind of like, every time you come out of her head, it feels like you've seen her perspective a bit more. It was a great idea to do the zooms. He usually comes up with great ideas.
The movie's presented in 1:6:6. Tell me about that decision and kind of what led you to that aspect ratio.
We'd done the favorite on 185, and I think, it was down. I don't know whether it was something to do with VistaVision, but Yorgos liked the idea of 1:6:6. I'd done a lot of 1:6:6 on films recently as well, and it's a really lovely sort of. It's called the golden ratio in painting because it's sort of got that aspect to it, and it's nice because it's sort of. It's not too widescreen, and it's got a portraiture feel to it, which is really nice. And it's sort of, it creeps up on you. You don't know whether it's squarer or wide. It's a good sort of in the middle kind of aspect. And I loved it, and I think Yorgos was keen on it as well. So by chance, when we decided to go VistaVision, since I've been going on about everyone saying it's 1:6:6 VistaVision, but it's actually 1.5. But it's closer to 1:6:6 than 1:85 is. So we were kind of, it's great that VistaVision, we can use that, and that's going to be the same aspect as our final aspect. And that was a part of the reason.
So you've been mentioning VistaVision, and I think there's probably people in the audience who don't know what that means. Can you just explain a little bit about VistaVision and first of all, like the last time I heard VistaVision was in conversations about ILM visual effects in the 80s. So how did that become your tool of choice?
I'm a little bit surprised at why it fell off. It's a bit like, I guess, the way VHS and Betamax fought it out and Betamax lost. One format will always win. And if you look back at the beginnings of VistaVision, it came out at sort of just around the same time as CinemaScope. So the whole anamorphic sort of system of like squeezing your 235 onto the negative via the lens was more preferable, and it seemed to work, and it just took off. Whereas VistaVision, what it did was, instead of the film going vertically through a gate, it would then go horizontally through a gate. So it's still 35mm, but it's going horizontally. So you get essentially twice the amount of negative on your sensor or your aspect.
It's 8 perf versus 4 perf, right?
It's lazy 8, they call it, because it's on the side and it goes through that way. It's basically what your SLR camera takes if you were shooting on stills film. And it's beautiful. It's a bit more pricey because it goes through a lot quicker than the vertical. So, but that was what the studios sort of tried to kind of, they engineered this as an idea for getting people back to the cinema because they were worried about TV. So they got people back to see these wider images. And all of Hitchcock's films, well, quite a few of them were shot in VistaVision. Because what you could do, I think, is what he did is he put a hard mask on it. So his films would have been shot 166, but they always feel widescreen. So what they did is they did a hard mask in the cinema so that it looked 235. And that's sort of even more interesting. I find that they're cropping it again. But, for us and our like what was great and why it fell off the sort of popularity stakes because it was a big camera. It was quite a noisy camera. And the CinemaScope just took off. But because the cameras were so well made, they were very, very solid transport systems inside them, and so very, very steady. They had no weave when they were filmed, so that's why they became popular in the post effects
for visual effects.
ILM.
Sure, yeah,
because they had this really great registered transport system. So it's like doof, you don't have any kind of weave. And I've just been doing tests on a Willcam VistaVision, and I was like, wow, that thing's solid. So most film cameras have a little bit of a because of the way they just transport the film. So that kept it going for a while. And to be honest with you, there's very few VistaVision cameras left. There's a Bocam, which is like an RE3 that's been Frankenstein, and that's the one we used on Poor Things. And it's noisy and it's light and it's very small, but it's very, very noisy. So for sync sound, it's a bit of a nightmare. So we ended up using that one on Poor Things, but we've been testing for another film, and there's a bit of another camera that's a bit quieter that we're excited about. And there's a lot of people shooting VistaVision at the minute. Paul Thomas Anderson shooting it.
Interesting.
Brady Corbett shooting it. So maybe I shouldn't be saying these things, but it's if you say Zoom's on the way back, watch out, VistaVision's coming back.
VistaVision coming back. I did not have that on my 2024 bingo card. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film stock, a beautiful film format because it's not as huge as IMAX, but it's certainly got something about it that's in that world of larger sort of format. And it's really, really, it feels like the right format that film should be shot at, personally, because it's like a film still.
So I'm just kind of curious because essentially, isn't it sort of the same area as like a 65 5-perf? So why would you choose one over the other?
65 kind of like it's easy. Well, I don't know. I think I like the idea that you're shooting on a 35mm neg still, whereas 65mm is sort of like a bigger negative, and the cameras are bigger. It's a beast of its own. But for sure, you're right. And 65mm tends to have a widescreen aspect to it, which I like the fact that VistaVision is square or like 1.5. It's all personal preference. I could go on.
So did you shoot the entire film in VistaVision, or did you switch to
No, because Yorgos is really adamant that he wants proper sync sound. He was like, that thing sounds like a tractor. We're not using that. So we could only use it for stuff that was non-sync, which is the reanimation scene. And to be fair, that camera wasn't a great workhorse. It was like the batteries were dying on it all the time, and it generally wasn't like, you couldn't rely on it. And we were using ARRI STs, and they're very reliable.
So, and we've just got a few minutes left, but if I can, I'd just love to fire some of the scenes, the sequences at you, and you can talk about your approach to lighting, because for me, each time we change locations, it was it was almost like a confection of all this new stuff to get to look at and to experience. So we started off in London, but then we go to Lisbon, which just exploded with color and light. And I've heard you say that was a particularly difficult sequence to shoot. Can you talk about the Lisbon section?
Yeah, it was a scale of the set was huge, but for some reason, by the way it was so big, it was kind of ungainly for us to get it the way we wanted it, and it felt like it was overwhelming trying to capture it in its entirety. And my reasoning was that it was we shot everything in one studio complex, but that section was in another studio complex, like 2 hours drive away. So I never really got to go there and let it sort of fuse over me all the time. I was always like, oh God, every time I got there, I was like, oh, it seems like I'm not sure how to light it. So it was on a lot of all of our craft levels. We all seem to struggle with that one a little bit, but it's really great that people don't kind of really, I think the potential it had, we tried to hit high, and we maybe could have hit better, but I'm glad that where we hit was still enough for people and they love it, you know? And it was just it was like a theme park. It was a big theme park that we were trying to, you know, grapple with and make it work, but it was a beast.
I think you're being overly self-critical. That whole sequence to me, it was so just
I'm
delightful.
Irish, I'm self-deprecating, I can't help it.
I think that whole sequence just was so delightfully kind of Jules Verne to me that it was just delicious
for
to watch.
Sure. The trams are up in the air, kind of bring you to another place. All right. Yeah. And it's a fun part of the film. It's great. Yeah.
And then the sequence on the ship, was just breathtaking to me. So I know that those backgrounds were an LED wall. So that material was all shot in camera, right? But that must have caused some headaches for you in terms of lighting that thing.
That was not a nightmare, but it was a difficult one. Yeah, but all of the other sets had an exterior as such. Like London, you could look out the window, you'd see London. If you looked out the windows in Paris, you'd see Paris. If you looked out Lisbon, you see Lisbon. So the ship, all you could see was nothing because it was in a green. We were not at sea. So Yorgos was going. He wanted to try the old techniques of the '30s films, which like the poor man's process, where you'd have a backdrop or a projection behind back in the old days. But obviously, there's new technology now, so he was really keen to try out the LED. Well, rear projection, or the like Fellini used to have. Like I saw this great thing about Fellini where he has this couple in a carriage, and if you come out to the studio, he had like a big canvas that was being rolled of trees and other trees in the foreground. So, any way you could do it, the studios would have done it interestingly, and Fellini for sure did it interesting. And one of the films we referenced for the ship, especially, was a film called "And the Ship Sails On," which is a Fellini film, which has crazy, beautiful sunsets all the time. And it's really a pushed kind of look, and that's something we were keen to try and do with Poor Things. So the new technology in the LED screen was our version of a rear projection for sure, or a painted backdrop, and we had lots of fun with that. But it was difficult because LED obviously is amazing, but as soon as you put up lights, and we're shooting on Ektachrome, all of that light spills everywhere, and it was like, oh shit, the LED wall looks really faded all of a sudden, and it's like this beautiful, expensive bit of kit that I needed to sort of like. I didn't know enough about it at the time. I know better now, but you need to really, really be careful of how the light is coming and that it's not spilling onto the wall. And we got there, but it was a challenge. Yeah.
The Alexandria sequence is so amazing to me. I just love the warmth of the light, but it's also kind of it's an unsettling sequence. And I love I love the way you mix and matched your live action photography with miniatures. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's it gets real for Bella in Alexandria, and that was like, obviously it's a place that doesn't exist, so that was a great opportunity to have a miniature sort of city and world, and that was a kind of storyboarded shot where it was like she comes down and she bites Harry Astley's hand, and as she screams, the camera comes away, and there's this beautiful miniature that it comes back from, and that's all shot as a miniature. We shot that shot for sure. Like there's a second unit DP called Tristan Oliver, and he shot that very shot that's in the film, but it's been obviously embellished a bit in the world of VFX, and it just seems to fit perfectly in the universe of Poor Things, and I have to say the music in this film is like wildly bombastic, so everything kind of is being driven by this great score done by Jerskin Fendrix that elevates it to another level and like really elevates the visuals, I think,
I appreciate that shout out. We actually we did a podcast episode with Jerskin a couple months ago talking about the score for Poor Things, and it was a fantastic.
Well, it's his first score, and he came at it very, very like differently to anybody else I could imagine, because he brought an emotional aspect to it, like as a childlike sort of thing, because his music's, he would admit to being quite childlike, and it was perfect for him, and Yorgos saw that in his music. So it was a great connection there.
And then we get to Paris, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about your work with the production designer and shooting on those amazing sets. I love the brothel. I love the floor that's lit from underneath. It's just such a wild kind of design conceit for a film that's set in the era that it is.
James Price and Shona Heath are like a phenomenal team together on that. They'd never worked together before, so it was a really beautiful kind of team effort. And they found a lot of painting references. I remember Shona showing me quite a few paintings of Parisian life by, in the Impressionistic era, and there was like a lot of lighting from above. If you look at a lot of Degas pictures, there's just like this bright ambience coming from below. Sorry, not above, from below. And it's just sort of a style, and maybe it's footlights or whatever. We kind of thought that would fit well in the scheme of it, and it looked out of place, but it looked perfectly in place. And as a composite set that the brothel was, it helped me a lot because it gave a bit of an ambience that I could work with. And it's a dark place otherwise, so I was very pleased about the underfloor lighting. And yeah, we had a lot of practicals in there. Poor Things, about 30 or 40% of the film is set in bedrooms. So, all these, what I find amazing about the film is it teases you with all these beautiful, like crazy worlds outside, but then you find your way into a bedroom, and that's where you stay for quite a bit of the film. And Paris, we spent a lot of time in a bedroom. So it was kind of crazy filming a tiny little bedroom on set, knowing you had to come through the brothel, and if you looked out the window, all of Paris was outside. So it was always a bit of a tease that we're not out there more, but that's the story, And I think that's the genius of it, in a way that you get a glimpse of it, but you don't get to see every bit of it. And it makes it feel like a bigger world because of it.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Well, Robbie, that's all the questions I have for you. I've had so much fun talking with you about this movie. I love Poor Things, and your work is just stunning. And anything else you want to say before I let you go?
Go see this film twice, because it's better on a second watch. And if you like it twice, go see it 3 times.
There you go, Robbie.
But I'm delighted. I'm really happy everybody likes it, and it's great to see it have a life, I'm really happy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on the Dolby podcast today to tell us about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Pleasure.
Many thanks to Robbie for joining us on the podcast today, and best of luck on March 10th at the 96th Academy Awards, which will be coming to you live from the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Searchlight for helping us put this conversation together. Poor Things is now playing in theaters, so be sure to check it out ahead of the Oscars. We'll have a link to tickets, as always, in our show notes. And speaking of awards, as I mentioned up top, this episode is part of our continuing coverage of the Academy Awards. If you'd like to hear more conversations with Oscar nominees in this category and others, please be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. Many of these awards are tough to pick and predict, and we will continue to offer these in-depth interviews filled with unique insights into the work of each of these nominated artists, which may make it just a little bit easier for you to fill out your Oscar ballot, whether you are an Academy member or simply want to do a little bit better in your Oscar office pool. If you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes, or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, thanks again for joining us. This is the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thank you for joining us.